so just a quick recap of what we saw in the video. Alrighty, let's kind of look at this really quickly. So we talked, I wish I had a pointer, but okay, we'll do it this way. So just a recap of what we saw in the video. 3 weeks, we don't even know we're pregnant. Right? Well, you know, we might, some of us might, but most of us don't even know. 3 weeks, we've got the future forebrain. So when you think about the forebrain, that's gonna be like what we normally see when we look at a brain, right? Then we have the spinal cord, what's coming down here, growing. 3 weeks, 3 weeks after being pregnant. How does that form? Do you guys remember when the video started? It folded like this and it looked like it made a tube, like straw. That's how that forms, okay? 3 little weeks. By the 4th week, just 1 more week, not an additional 4 weeks, but just 1 more week from the 4th. We actually have the formation where it's starting to look, where you see, like, you can tell now that this is the skull, this is where it's gonna form, and then the brain and the body and all of that stuff is gonna fall here. 7 weeks, clear differentiation, fore and hind. So we talk about localization a lot in neuroscience. That basically means, where can I find that thing?
Okay.
So the front part, the back part, and you start to get that differentiation at 7 weeks. So 3 weeks, we exist. For those who are pro, just FYI. 3 weeks, we exist. 4 weeks, we start to actually have the differentiation. 7 weeks, things start to look like they're supposed to. And then 3 months, this is what's going on in the tummy. You actually have a formed brain. We have a lot of cortex here, but you clearly have forebrain right here. And then they started talking about a bunch of folds.
Yeah, bumps
And gyri. Do you remember that that term?
So,
That's for connectivity, and that's why our brain is amazing. We can hold so much information because God starts rolling it up and folding it in, bending it over.
packing it in nicely.
And then we're like, well, how do you know all of that stuff when you're a little baby and you're
Right.
so tiny? Because he's starting to kind of bend everything together like a little bag. And everything is kind of moldable. That happens to 6 months. 9 months when they show up, that's your baby. But key thing to remember, it started 3 weeks. And then remember, we talked about these cells being gymnasts. So they're running as fast as they can right here. Sure.
For those, I'm asking a question for those of you who's planning to get more children. But what can an adult take to help make your brain better or stronger?
Iron. Iron. I ate so much spinach with my daughter. Oh my God. I put proof in the spinach. Iron. Because it needs to be fortified. Your blood needs to be fortified.
See what happens then.
You get supplements from your pediatrician. Go to the doctor like Supreme Cow. Yeah, you get supplements. They test you ahead of time, and then you can get supplements. But spinach is very important for cell differentiation.
Okay.
Good question. Very, very good question. Critical because, again, we said 2 weeks. Okay, we're going to go to the next slide. All right, so let's look at this in a bigger scale. So remember, we already talked about conception. Boom, I'm pregnant. 9 months. Boom, I have a baby. 1 year old. Did you guys catch when he said that pruning is still going on till 1 year old? And then he said it continues into adolescence. So the synaptic pruning, which is based on your individual experiences, is happening here.
So during that process, we can still be feeding our children things for our brain.
You should.
It's still the same spinach.
Not could be, should be, and after today will be. Exactly.
Which will be still the same spinach or no?
I mean, you're talking about diet? I was talking about feeding them information.
I was talking to the health strengthening and
Yeah, definitely that, but what's really important here is just exposure, stimulus. So we'll talk more about that. So another thing that I want to pay attention to, you may not be able to see it where you are, but from here, like just before birth and into birth, we have sensory pathways starting. So the vision and the hearing, that's where it's peaking and going here. And then just prior to them becoming 1 year old, language is peaking. So then you're going to be speaking a little bit more. So going back to my soft egg story and God saying that things would be okay. Language for my son actually didn't start till 3 years old. And so a delay doesn't mean a deficit. It just means that it may fall somewhere else in the trajectory. But again, using social media in a positive way, I push this. If you have a child, go to social media and find out what these milestones are supposed to be. And just find out where you think they fit, gauge it, and find out what they should be doing at this time. Big point and what we're probably going to be focusing on here, higher cognitive function. All of the things that are driving them to do what they're doing, how they're processing information, happens between 1 and 18.
Okay.
And then we're starting to taper off here. Is that pretty clear? Is that folding into the video that you saw? You having good images? Okay, great. All right, brain systems. Now we can move on. So this is another video. If you want to try to get the link and put it in there. And I'll dim the lights. We're doing okay? Okay. While Ghazi's pulling up the video, we basically have 3 brains that make up 1 brain. That's what the literature tells us. Oh, we did go. We just can't see it.
He's just a space. Right.
There we go. Okay, I'll talk afterwards.
What's the best way to think about the brain? It's insanely complicated. Everything connects to everything. A gazillion little subregions. Amid all that complexity, there's a broadly sort of simplifying way to sort of think about aspects of brain function when it comes to behavior. And this was an idea put forth by this guy, Paul MacLean, a grand poobah on the field, conceptually of thinking of the brain as coming in 3 functional layers, the triune brain. And again, this is highly schematic. The brain really doesn't come in 3 layers. But one can think of the firstmost, the bottommost, the most ancient as being what's often termed the reptilian brain. Where basically the parts in there, we've got the same wiring as in a lizard, as in any ancient creature. It's been there forever, ancient wiring at the base of the brain, most inside. And what does that region do? All the regulatory stuff. Your body temperature changes, it senses it and causes you to sweat or shiver. It's monitoring your blood glucose levels. It's like releasing hormones that are essential to sort of everyday shopkeeping. It's just, keeping regulatory stuff in balance. Sitting on top of that is conceptually what could be termed the limbic system, the emotional part of the brain. And this is very much a mammalian specialty. Lizards are not well known for their emotional lives. Part of the brain having to do with fear, arousal, anxiety, sexual longings, all those sorts of things. Very mammalian. You're off there in the grasslands, butting heads with somebody else with antlers, and it's your limbic system that's heavily involved in that. Then sitting on the top is the layer 3, the cortex. The cortex, spanking new, most recently evolved part of the brain. Everybody's got a little bit of cortex, but it's not until you get to primates that you got tons, and then apes, and then us. So functionally, it's very easy to think of this simplistic flow of commands. Layer 2, the limbic system, can make layer 1, the reptilian brain, activate. When is that? Your heart speeds faster, not because of a regulatory reptilian thing, ooh, you've been cut, something painful, but an emotional state. You're a wildebeest and there's some scary, menacing wildebeest threatening you in your hand. That emotional state causes your limbic system to activate the reptilian brain, and your heart beats faster. You have a stress response, not because a regulatory change happened in your body, but for an emotional reason. Then it's very easy to think of layered on top, this cortical area commanding your second layer, your limbic system, to have an emotional response. Rather than something emotional, here's a threatening beast right in front of you, something emotional, you see a movie that's emotionally upsetting. See a movie. These are not real characters, they're pixels, and it's your cortex that's turning that abstract cognitive state into an emotional response. Likewise, your cortex, layer 3, could influence events down in layer 1. You see something upsetting, you think about something, you think about mortality. One of these days my heart is going to stop beating and your heart's going to beat faster. You're not bleeding and hypotensive, you're not in some hypoglycemia. Nothing in the reptilian brain can make sense of this. A purely cognitive state, ooh, on the other side of the planet there are people undergoing some traumatic event and I feel upset about it, and your reptilian brain responds. So it's very easy, given that, to think of a 3 talks to 2 talks to 1 sort of scenario. Just as readily, though, 1 talks to 2 talks to 3. What would be a case of that? What's your reptilian brain talking to your cortex? Remarkable finding. When we're hungry, we make harsher moral judgments about people's transgressions. We're less charitable. We cheat more in economic games. Our cortex assessing the effects of pro-sociality, anti-sociality, and altruism and its evolution, and part of what it's doing in deciding how it feels about somebody else's plight is, if your stomach's gurgling, if you're hungry, if you're in pain, that affects very cortical judgment type areas. Layer 1, this ancient reptilian brain that should have nothing to do with how your cortex works, having tons to do with it. Or layer 2, influencing layer 3, your limbic system, your emotional state, influence your abstract cognitive processes. What's the most obvious example of it? When we're under stress, when we're in an emotionally aroused state, we make stupid, impulsive decisions that seem brilliant at the time. Affective, emotional, limbic layer 2, influencing how your cortical cortex goes about its abstractions. It's not that abstract. It's embedded in the biology of all these layers. This interaction between these layers, seems this very mechanical process, potentially even an unconscious one. How do we consciously have, say, our cortex regulate an emotion, the limbic 2 layer? Simple. Think about the most arousing, wonderful thing that ever happened to you umpteen decades ago, and your cortex is evoking a memory that's got your limbic system humming along in some excited state. Or think cortically, or pull out the memories of some traumatic event, and your limbic system is responding. How about reptilian level? Easy to make it get into an agitated state. Sit there and think about something incredibly upsetting. Think about some memory that was truly disturbing. Think about mortality. Think about global warming, and your heart speeds up. Layer 3, in a very conscious way, has mobilized layer 1. A lot harder is the inverse. You're sitting there and you suffer from high blood pressure, and either they can marinate you in antihypertensive drugs for the rest of your life, or an alternative approach, a biofeedback approach, is sit there and think about the happiest day of your life. Think about being in an open field that's beautiful. Think about your favorite vacation. Think about, and if it's the right thinking about, suddenly your heart slows down. Suddenly your blood pressure goes down. The core of biofeedback is figuring out what sort of conscious states you can evoke that will affect your reptilian brain in a direction that's good for your health. And all you do then is learn how to get better and better in some stressed, hypertensive circumstance. What conscious, active thinking can I mobilize here at this point that will cause changes in how my big toes blood flow is working in a case like that is very conscious regulation of more autonomic, more ancient parts of your brain.